Welcome back, Troops. Let's tab 59. This is my second attempt this morning to try and get this video out, because I've just done the video, right, and I started to play it back, luckily, before I packed up and went home. I played the video back and the wind has been horrific. It's a beautiful day. But once I got out on the open fields there to make the video, it was just too noisy, even though I've got the little furry thing on the mic. So I'm going to attempt it again. I don't like doing videos indoors. I could sit down in my study and make this video, but it's not the same as being out on the tab doing the video. So hopefully this second attempt will come out. So I want to talk about Porton Down and what Porton Down's about and what went on at Porton Down, as much as we know, because Porton Down is a highly secretive establishment within the Ministry of Defence here in the United Kingdom. So for those of you who don't know, for you guys that might be overseas and not heard of Porton Down, and I'm sure many countries around the world that might be watching this have got their own similar facility. Porton Down then is the UK's main establishment for the testing and development of chemical and biological weapons. Mainly today it's used for protective measures, although they do hold at Porton Down, it's public knowledge, they hold pretty much every known disease, biological and chemical weapons, forms of them. So they've got bubonic plague there, they've got Ebola there, they've got all sorts there, because they've come up with vaccines against it to protect people against it, and they're developing stuff all the time. So how did it start? Where is Porton Down? So Porton Down, the establishment, is very close to, or not far from, a village called Porton Down in Wiltshire, which is a county in southwest of England. So what happened? Well, World War I got underway, and after a couple of years, the Germans deployed mustard gas and chlorine gas against the Allied troops fighting out in France and Belgium. I think the first use might have been against Canadian soldiers. My own grandfather, a British soldier at the time, was subjected to mustard agent in a chemical attack, and he suffered the effects. He survived, thank goodness, and he didn't have any permanent, really. His eyesight was a bit poor afterwards, but he survived and didn't have too much problem afterwards. So once the Germans started using these chemical weapons on the battlefields in France and Belgium, the UK decided we needed to do something about it to develop some protective measures, i.e. a respirator, a gas mask. And so that's what happened. They set up a few huts at Porton Down on this real estate, sealed it all off, fenced it all off, and started to develop protective measures and test it on troops, etc. After World War I was finished, into the 20s, Porton Down quietened down a little bit, but we still we were still conducting tests and experiments, etc. But lots of nations got together and said, hang on, these chemical weapons are hideous, we can't use them in warfare, let's sign up to a treaty. UK, along with lots of other countries, signed up to it, but what we said was, we still want to develop, we're not going to use them, we're going to develop chemical weapons, because the best form of defence is a good offence, and we're going to hold chemical weapons, but we'll sign up to not using them unless another country uses those type of weapons against us. You gas us, we'll gas you back, but we're not going to use it as a first strike weapon. So that's what happened. And get into the early 30s, and for about 10 years leading up to the Second World War, just inside the Second World War, so that 10-year period, early 30s to very early 40s, Britain had its colonies still, and we had India. Now, there's a city out in India called Rawalpindi. It's now part of modern-day Pakistan. And we had out there some British troops. We had a lot of British Indian soldiers out there as well. So Porton Down sent scientists out there and set up a testing facility there. It's a big garrison town, British military garrison town, Rawalpindi. So they get out there, they set it up, and what they do is they start testing mustard gas on British Indian troops and some British troops as well, for two reasons. The first reason was they wanted to find out the dosage of mustard gas that the British would have to use on the battlefield to cause casualties to an enemy. And secondly, they wanted to see the difference, this is horrendous, they wanted to see what the different effects were of mustard gas on white British soldiers' skin compared to the darker British Indian soldiers' skin. But of course there's no difference, skin is skin. The colour's not going to affect it, but that's what they were testing at the time. So what did they do? Well, they marched the troops into gas chambers. The troops were dressed in just short trousers, tropical type trousers, and short sleeve shirts. They were wearing a respirator, so they didn't get the mustard agent into their eyes or their respiratory tracts. They wanted to see the effects of mustard agent at different dosages on different skins. That's what they were testing. So they conducted these tests for about 10 years. It was horrific. Lots and lots of soldiers obviously suffered horrific blisters to their skin, depending on the dosage they received or the amount of time they were in the gassed environment. Many were hospitalised, and there wasn't a lot of documentation about it for what the long-term effects were going to be. We now know for some time that mustard agent in particular can cause cancers. I suppose skin cancer is a good example of what it would cause. But it wasn't documented. It didn't really keep records of who had been exposed to how much. They just wanted to see the there and then effects and make their decisions from that, their findings on that. So those soldiers that were exposed back then, I mean, many won't be alive. I would imagine there's probably no one alive now that was in that period. But they didn't know the long-term effects because they didn't follow it up. Pretty horrendous. Now, World War II is happening, and as we know, the Germans and the British didn't deploy chemical weapons on the battlefield in World War II. When the Allies were going through Germany towards the end of the Second World War and then the surrender happened, the British, along with the Allies, discovered that the Germans had stockpiled different chemical weapons. And when we tested these chemical weapons, looked at these chemical weapons, Porton Down that is, we realised that the defensive systems that we thought we had, i.e. the gas masks that were issued to our forces for the Second World War, and the gas masks and filters that were given to the general public. Remember, every man, woman and child in the United Kingdom during World War II was issued with a respirator, which is a feat in itself. It's a fantastic feat that it gave everyone a respirator. But we found out from looking at these German chemical weapons, gases, that our respirator systems would have been effective. They wouldn't have been able to protect people from what the Germans had. So we get these chemicals back to Porton Down, and now we want to start testing them. All the time, Porton Down is expanding. The buildings are getting bigger, etc. It's first built in 1916 with just a few huts. And as time went on, leading up to the Second World War, through Second World War beyond, the establishment got bigger with more facilities. So now we're into the 50s. And this is where it gets a little bit worse, if you like. So we've got conscript army, armed forces, many conscripts in the forces. And we decide we've discovered sarin, we've got sarin now. And sarin is a nerve agent, a highly effective nerve, nasty stuff. We want to see what happens and how we can protect our troops from sarin. So we need human volunteers. Now, I'm pretty sure it's well documented. The volunteers that did step forward in the 1950s were duped. They weren't told what they were going to be tested exactly with. They were told they were going to be exposed to the common cold and that they were looking for a cure or an antidote or protective measure to the common cold. That's what these British Forces personnel believed they were going to be tested with, the common cold. No one's going to worry about that. Young, fit men, common cold, you're going to get over it. They were also told they were going to be given 15 shillings extra pay. 15 shillings. It's not even a pound. It's not even £1. But 15 shillings back then, in the early 50s, was a fair amount of money, I suppose, to a young conscript. Also, they were told they were going to be given an extra 3 days leave. That's great to get a 3-day pass back in conscript days. So 15 shillings, 3 days leave. And also a lot of these troops, these conscripts back then, were quite bored kicking around in camp, marching up and down the square. This is something different. It's going to get them away from camp. They're going to do something different. Just get a few tests done on 15 shillings and 3 days leave. So they didn't have a shortage of volunteers. In fact, some volunteers even come back for a second time, even though they knew it was something other than the cold. So how did they do it? Well, what they did, they got the volunteers in a group of 6 men at a time. They would go into the gas chamber with 2 Porton Down scientists. How were they dressed? So the volunteers, what they did, they got 2 patches of material, 2 square patches of material. One was a flannel type material, which would represent the shirt that the soldier would wear. And the other square piece of material was serge material. It was the stuff that the battle dress tunic was made of. They get 2 square patches of these materials and tape them to the inside of the left forearm onto their skin. On top of that, they would wear some oversized coveralls, some overalls. They were given a woolly hat and a respirator, and in they went. So they go into the chamber, they roll a sleeve up, and the scientists in there with them would put a drop of sarin nerve agent onto the material. Obviously, it's going to soak through the material and get onto their skin, and then they could test their blood afterwards to see how much sarin got into their blood and what it was doing to the blood cells, etc. How much did they put on? Well, they were using 300 milligrams of sarin at a time, dripped onto these patches of material. In April 1953, a guy called John Kelly, a volunteer serviceman, fell ill and slipped into a coma. And he was in a coma for quite a while, but he survived. He come out of the coma and he survived. So they had a bit of a meeting at Porton Down and went, what can we do about this? What we'll do, we'll carry on testing because we need this information. We'll reduce the amount that's put onto the troops. And we'll reduce it down to 200 milligrams from 300 milligrams. Oh, it's going to make a difference, isn't it? So that's what they did. That was in April when the guy John Kelly fell into the coma. In May of the same year, just a month later, they're now down to 200 milligrams of sarin in testing. A guy called Ronald Madison, leading aircraftsman Ronald Madison, an RF lad, 20 years old. He volunteers. He's got a sweetheart back in County Durham, where he's from, a girl called Mary, and he thinks this is just for me. Extra 15 shillings, I can buy an engagement ring for Mary and I can get engaged to her when I come home on leave. So that was his plan. He volunteers along with others and they go down to Porton Down. They're dressed the same patches put on their arm, and into the chamber they go. At 17 minutes past 10 that morning of the incident, they administer 200 milligrams onto his patches of clothing on his left forearm, along with the other 5 volunteers that are in there with him. That's at 17 minutes past 10. Within 20 minutes of him receiving that dose of sarin nerve agent, he falls ill. He starts to complain he's not feeling right. He starts to lose his hearing and he starts to collapse. They very quickly remove the contaminated clothing, the patches from his arm, and they get him outside the chamber. They put him onto a bench outside. He's getting worse. He's starting to convulse, having trouble breathing. They bang atropine into him, 2 injections of atropine. Those of you who don't know, atropine is a type of antidote to nerve agent poisoning. In fact, British troops, lots of you out there will remember, during the Cold War days in training, NBC training, you'd have a dummy atropine pen. You'd be told how to use it. Up to 3 were issued to you in the event of war, when there's a threat of a chemical weapon being used. Troops in Gulf War I, some of them actually administrated atropine to themselves. They were given their 3 injector pens, which they kept in a respirator haversack for that very reason. So they banged 2 injections, one up, not straight away, one after. I think it's every 15 minutes you're supposed to administrate it. So they bang one pen into him. They call for an ambulance. They bang another pen into him. Ambulance arrives on the scene, and they get leading air craftsman Ronald Madison into the back of the ambulance and take him to the on-site medical facility at Porton Down. It's getting worse when they get him there. He's not breathing. They're giving him respiratory help. They also bang in an injection of adrenaline directly into his heart. But by 11 o'clock, 45 minutes later, after him being exposed to the agent, 11 o'clock, Ronald Madison dies. His death's not reported until 1:30 that same day. He passes away sadly. They hold an inquest in Salisbury, a secret inquest inquiry into his death with the coroner. His father, Ronald Madison's father, goes along to the inquest, but he's signed the Official Secrets Act. He says, you can't discuss what you're going to hear now, etc., etc. And they hold the inquest, and the result, the outcome of that inquest by the coroner, the verdict given is death by misadventure. What Porton Down scientists say is everyone else is fine from it. What must have happened was Ronald Madison must have been specifically sensitive. His biological system must have been very, very sensitive to sarin, and that's why he died. No one else has. So that's the verdict, death by misadventure. And Madison's father can't breathe a word, not to any other family member. Ronald Madison's body is returned to the family for burial after his organs had been harvested. Stomach, his lungs, his heart, tissue samples, blood, etc. That's all taken out of poor old Ronald Madison. The coffin, a steel coffin, is then sealed and bolted down so it can't be opened, and the body is returned. Compensation? Madison's father receives £40, £20 of which is for his father to buy black clothing for the funeral. £16 is for the undertaker's fees, the funeral costs, and the final £4 to make up the £40, is for catering purposes for the wake. £40. And that was that. And testing continued. Testing on sarin continued. Amongst other tests, for instance, a troop of Royal Marine Commandos were tested. They tested LSD, hallucinogenic drug, on these Royal Marine Commanders. Fit, strong, tough men. These aren't just your normal infantry, these are Royal Marine Commandos. They're unknowingly given LSD and then told to perform some tasks out in the field. Drive a vehicle, do some map reading, crew a weapon system. That's dangerous enough on LSD, isn't it? Find this anti-tank rocket, son. Get that mortar out. It's some LSD. Get that mortar out. Mad. Anyway, they couldn't perform the tasks. Obviously, they fell about laughing. They were all incapacitated. It was decided after that they actually would never use LSD on the battlefield. But these troops never knew. They were traumatised. Troops were absolutely traumatised by some of the stuff that was tested on them down at Porton Down. As I say, many of them were told it was just a common cold that was going to be tested on them. Now, the death of Ronald Madison from sarin agent was covered up for many, many, many years. But eventually the family started to kick up a stink about it. And that led to Operation Antler, which was a Wiltshire police, civilian police investigation into Porton Down. Madison's inquiry, they reopened another inquiry with the coroner, and eventually they changed the cause of death from misadventure to manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter. And there was no Crown prosecution convictions or anything, any charges brought against Porton Down, but compensation was forced on Porton Down, and they paid the Madison family, the ancestors of him I suppose, £100,000. Operation Antler led to another 6 veterans that had been exposed to stuff down there to compensation as well. I don't know the figure of what those veterans got, but 6 others received compensation. During the Second World War, biological weapons Anthrax Island. I can't remember the real name of it now. It begins with a G. It's an island up off of Scotland, mainland Scotland, a small island. It's compulsory purchased off the owners for £500. And what Porton Down done, they developed anthrax. They wanted to test it, see if it's any good on the battlefield. So they took a number of sheep up there. They tethered the sheep with little pegs on the island, strapped them up. They then went downwind and planted an anthrax bomb in a can on top of a post, a stake in the ground. Stood back, detonated it. It went bang, big sort of cloud of brown vapour, brown smoke, if you like, drifted across the sheep. And within a few days, they're all dead. All the sheep were carcated. Sheep were taken away and incinerated. The ground was contaminated for a very long time. It's going to take decades for it to, or longer, for it to naturally deteriorate. A very resilient biological weapon, anthrax. So it was deemed that it would be no good on the battlefield because you'd used it to kill troops, but then no one could go on the land. It couldn't be used for decades. It'd be just too difficult to maintain. So it was decided it wouldn't be a battlefield weapon. And they just developed defences to anthrax rather than using it as an offensive weapon. So years later, now into the 80s, the island is still contaminated. Not many people in the UK knew about it at that time, leading up to that time anyway. It was all quite hushed up. Of course, local people did. Local people that were up there, they knew about Anthrax Island. And there was not a terrorist group, they were a militant group, if you like. Can't remember their name either now. But they took soil samples from Anthrax Island, put it up into bags and dropped a bag at Porton Down. They dropped a bag somewhere else with notes on it saying, what are you going to do about this contaminated land? And that sort of forced the hand. I think in 1986, the MOD decided they have to try and clean the island up. So they went up there, removed some of the soil, done some testing. They then sprayed the island with formaldehyde and salt water to try and decontaminate the soil. They give it a good dosing with all that detail, and then they put some more sheep on the island to live for 4 years. They went back and monitored the sheep, and after 4 years, the sheep were still healthy, so they said, right, the island is safe again. So they then gave the island, well, they didn't give the island back, the ancestors of the people that they bought the island off of had to pay £500, the same fee that the MOD paid for it. The ancestors had to give £500 back to the MOD and they got their island back. What they done with it, I don't know. Other testing that was done with biological. This is like late 60s and the 70s. They decided they wanted to find out how a biological aerosol would spread across UK mainland. So they decided to test it by sailing a ship off the south coast of Dorset in England, Lyme Bay area. Sailed a ship up there. Unbeknown, nobody in the UK knew what was going on. The general public didn't know. They sailed the ship up there and sprayed out this. It wasn't a chemical agent, it was an agent that they could track with ultraviolet light. They just wanted to see how far it would spread in the natural wind, if you like, and this vapour would spread across the countryside. It went a long way. They weren't quite happy with that, so they couldn't use a severe biological agent on their own people, but they used something else. It was a bacteria, but it was something that wasn't going to do any long-lasting harm. They actually used E. coli. They sprayed it from an aircraft. They sprayed it from a ship as well, but I think they sprayed it from an aircraft. An aircraft flew off the Dorset coast, released this bacterial vapour to see how far it spread across. But that was kept quiet. Obviously, when it eventually came out, it leaked out like a lot of stuff does. The local people of Dorset went absolutely radio rental. They weren't happy at all. And about 1975, something like that. But the MOD were having none of it. No, it's harmless. Shut up. There was no reported cases, as far as I know, of anyone getting ill or anything like that from those experiments. But it does just show you how far they went. I know they also tested, Porton Down scientists tested another nerve agent, a really bad one, worse than Sarin, VX nerve agent. You don't want to get a sniff of that bad boy. That's NX, mate. Roll your cabinet up, it's over, you're going home. in a box probably. And they went out to Nigeria. So Porton Down scientists went out to Nigeria and sprayed VX nerve agent. Now, as far as I know, there's little other information about that, of where they exactly sprayed it and what casualties they were from VX nerve agent. I mean, this stuff is more deadly than Sarin. What happened out there, I don't know. But I know that it happened out in Nigeria. So, testing on British troops, British forces personnel down at Porton Down with chemicals and biological weapons, etc., went on up until 1989. I believe it went from 49 to 89 at Porton Down, the testing on troops. I remember as a young soldier out in Germany seeing on orders in the 80s, now and again you'd look at orders that were posted up in your lines. You had to read them. As part of being a soldier, you must read orders. And up on orders it said that they were looking for volunteers for NBC work or testing. I can't remember the exact wording now, down at Porton Down. And there was an incentive of maybe some extra pay, I can't remember, and some leave. And I know that soldiers went off and did it more than once. Soldiers went back. But it was done up until 89. Now, there's still testing down at Porton Down. Obviously, we've got Porton Down holds all sorts of nasty viruses, biological viruses, and pretty much every chemical known to man. The Novichok poisoning in Salisbury, not that long ago, where a defected Russian agent was attacked with a nerve agent down in Salisbury with Novichok. That samples from that attack were taken to Porton Down, and Porton Down identified that it was Novichok, and it pretty much proved that it was a chemical developed in the old Soviet Union, maybe back in the 90s, 80s or 90s, and therefore they knew that that chemical agent came from Russia. So they do lots of other work, obviously testing of various NBC kits. They do, it's not just that, they test people that, like the new body armor systems. They'll put the kit on the lad, the helmet, the new webbing, the body armor, and get them on a treadmill and test their heat. They can raise the temperature in the room to test how much he's carrying, his exposure to heat, etc. So there's a wide variety of testing that goes on down there, but I'm pretty sure they're not putting Sarin or any other nerve agents directly onto troops anymore, which is a good thing. So there's a bit about Porton Down, some of the history, a brief history of what went on down there, and a few cases where it went terribly wrong, unfortunately. There's lots more online. If you're interested in that type of thing, have a look at it. And you can see some better videos than this, obviously, on YouTube. My little videos ain't that great. But if you're new to my channel and you haven't subscribed, please consider it. I'm not saying do it, I'm saying please consider it. We're now approaching Christmas. I've got more videos to come up. Your support is really, really helpful. I love your comments. I can't answer all the comments as much as I'd like to. I just couldn't spend that long answering so many comments coming in. I'm busy. But I do read them and I answer where I can. So please keep those coming in. I love hearing from people that know more than me or correct me, because I get things wrong. So, don't shoot me. But please, if I get things wrong, let me know. And then everyone else can have a read and see what's gone on and where I've gone wrong. And I learn from it too. So thanks for all the support. Thanks for all the comments. Keep the channel growing. Stay safe, everybody. Until the next time, get out there, get some fresh air. Lap this sunshine up. Let's tab.